There was nothing remarkable about my life before that day. I was just a 14-year-old boy living in Riverton, Wyoming, a town where nothing ever really happened. The kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where kids rode their bikes until the streetlights flickered on, and where Sundays meant church followed by lunch at the local diner. My father, Michael Turner, was a pastor of our small community church, a man of unwavering faith and gentle wisdom. He was the kind of person who could calm a storm with just his voice, who never seemed shaken by anything life threw his way. My mother, Susan, was a schoolteacher, warm and patient, the kind of woman who made you feel safe just by being in the same room. And then there was me, Ethan Turner, just another kid trying to make sense of the world. I wasn't special. I wasn't extraordinary. I played football, got decent grades, and spent my free time fishing at the creek with my best friend, Daniel. My biggest worries were finishing my homework and whether or not the girl I liked, Sophia, even knew I existed. Looking back, I see how small my world was, how blind I was to the forces moving beyond what I could see. Because if I had known that everything I understood about life was about to change forever, maybe I would have paid more attention. But can anyone ever really be prepared for the moment when their world turns upside down? It started with something so small, so insignificant, that I didn't even recognize it as a beginning, a stomach ache. At first, I barely noticed it. A dull discomfort after dinner, nothing serious. My mom gave me some tea and told me to get some rest. "You've been overdoing it with football practice," she said. "You just need to sleep it off." But by the middle of the night, the pain had become unbearable. It was like something was tearing me apart from the inside. I curled up in bed, clutching my stomach, breaking into a cold sweat. I must have cried out, because the next thing I knew, my mother was at my side, her voice soft but filled with worry. "Ethan, talk to me. Baby, what's wrong?" "I don't know," I gasped. "It hurts. It hurts so bad." Everything after that was a blur. My father carried me down the stairs. My mother dialing the hospital, her voice shaking. The rush to the car, my dad's hands white-knuckling the steering wheel as we sped down the empty highway. I could hear my parents whispering prayers. My mother holding my hand. "Try and be strong for me. Just hold on. Sweetheart," she murmured. "We're almost there." But I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. The pain was unbearable. It wasn't just pain. It was something deeper, something I couldn't explain. Like I was being pulled away, like something inside me was breaking apart. My vision blurred, the world around me fading. Then suddenly, silence. A silence so deep, so absolute, that it swallowed everything. I didn't feel the car anymore. I didn't feel the pain. I didn't feel anything. And then I realized I wasn't in the car anymore. I was above it, floating. I could see my mother clutching my hand, see my father gripping the wheel, his lips moving in silent prayer. I could see myself lying in the back seat, pale and still, my chest barely rising. I should have been terrified. I should have been confused. But I wasn't. I felt light, free, as if, for the first time, I was seeing the world as it really was. And then I felt something else, a warmth. It started as a small flicker, then grew, surrounding me, filling me. It wasn't like the warmth of the sun or a summer breeze. It was something alive, something that pulsed with love, with peace, with a power I had never known. And then I saw it, a light, so bright, so pure, that it made everything else seem dim in comparison. It wasn't just light. It was calling me, and I knew, deep in my soul, that I was going home. I didn't resist. I welcomed it. Before we continue with the rest of the story, I have something special for you. If you want to be featured in our next video and receive a personal message, comment below with your name and city. Imagine thousands of people seeing your name and hearing a special message just for you, your moment to shine. So don't forget, leave a like, comment your name and city, and let's build this beautiful community together. I wasn't afraid. That was the first thing I noticed. I should have been screaming, panicking, trying to fight my way back. But as I drifted higher, away from the car, from the world I had always known, all I felt was peace, a deep, unshakable peace. I looked down and saw the hospital lights flickering in the distance. Saw my father running through the doors, carrying my body in his arms. My mother was right behind him, sobbing, her voice breaking as she called out for help. Doctors rushed forward, nurses shouting instructions, but their voices sounded muffled, like they were coming from behind a thick glass wall. I watched as they laid my body on a gurney, wires and tubes suddenly everywhere. My father stood frozen, his lips still moving in prayer. My mother clutched his arm, tears running freely down her face. And yet, even as I saw their pain, I felt no fear, because something else had taken hold of me, something far greater than anything I had ever known. The light pulled me forward, warm and inviting. It wasn't just around me, it was inside me, filling every part of me with a love so powerful, so overwhelming, that I thought my heart would burst. And then, I was no longer in the hospital. I was somewhere else. The first thing I noticed was the sky. It stretched endlessly, but there was no sun, no stars, just an infinite golden glow, radiating from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't just light. It was alive, pulsing like a heartbeat, filling everything with warmth. The air was thick with something I couldn't quite describe. It wasn't wind, it wasn't a scent, but it was pure. Every breath I took felt like drinking in something sacred, something that healed me from the inside out. And then there was the music. It wasn't coming from a single source. It was woven into the very fabric of this place. Harmonies layered over one another, melodies so rich and vast that they wrapped around me like a second skin. It wasn't just something I heard. It was something I felt running through my veins, vibrating in my bones. I took a step forward, but it didn't feel like walking. It was effortless, as if I was being carried by the very air itself. Then, in the distance, I saw them, figures. They stood in the golden light, their faces turned toward me. Some I didn't recognize, yet I knew them. Somehow, I understood that they had always been a part of me, even before I was born. And then my breath caught in my throat, because standing there, smiling, waiting for me, was my grandfather. I had never met him. He had died long before I was born. But I had seen pictures, an old black and white photograph of my mother's album, a much older man with tired eyes and a weathered face. But that wasn't who stood before me now. This man was young, strong. His eyes were bright, filled with a kind of joy I had never seen before. His hands reached out, and as I moved closer, I felt something stir deep inside me. Recognition. "Ethan," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You made it." Tears burned my eyes. "Grandpa," he laughed, a deep, rich sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air around us. "It's good to see you, kid." I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to say. I had never met this man, and yet I had always known him. He put a hand on my shoulder, and the moment his fingers touched me, a flood of images filled my mind. Memories I had never lived. My grandfather holding my mother as a baby, walking through fields of golden wheat, standing at the altar of a tiny church, his hands folded in prayer. "I've been watching over you," he said, his voice gentle. "We all have." I looked around, suddenly aware of how many others stood in the distance. Faces I couldn't quite place, yet felt drawn to, as if they had been waiting for me. Where am I?" I asked. My grandfather's smile deepened. "You already know." And I did. Deep in my soul, I knew. I was in heaven. A new presence emerged then, so powerful that everything else seemed to fade. The air itself shifted, charged with something beyond comprehension. I turned and saw him, a figure bathed in radiant light. His face unlike anything I had ever seen before. He was familiar, and yet completely beyond my understanding. His eyes were like oceans, vast and endless, filled with love so pure it made my knees tremble. He didn't speak with words, but I heard him, felt him, and the moment he looked at me, I knew I was standing in the presence of Jesus. I couldn't move, not out of fear, not out of hesitation, but because I had never been in the presence of something so overwhelming, so infinite, and yet so deeply personal. Jesus stood before me, not in the way I had imagined as a child, not like the paintings in Sunday school or the figures in storybooks. He wasn't just a man standing in front of me. He was light, love, power, and peace itself. His presence didn't just fill the space around me. It filled me. I wanted to fall to my knees, but before I could, he reached out. His hand, strong, warm, touched my shoulder, and the moment he did, it was as if a river of pure love poured into me. Love that was alive. Love that had always been there. Even when I hadn't known it, I couldn't speak. I couldn't find the words to express what I was feeling because it was too much, too vast, too powerful. And yet, in that moment, I felt more known than I ever had in my entire life. He looked at me, not just at my face, but into me, through me, and I knew he saw everything. Every moment of my life, every thought I had ever had, every fear, every failure, every hidden part of me that I had never spoken aloud. He saw the times I had doubted, the moments I had felt alone, the times I had wondered if God even heard my prayers, if he even cared. And yet, there was no judgment in his eyes, only love, a love so deep, so consuming, that it made my heart ache. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I didn't care. I didn't need to speak, because he already knew everything I wanted to say. But still he spoke, not with his mouth, with his spirit. His words filled me, not just my ears, but my entire being. "Ethan, you are mine." The moment he said it, it was as if my soul recognized something it had always known but had forgotten. I had always belonged to him. Always. I trembled under the weight of it, not because I was afraid, but because for the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be loved beyond comprehension. To be loved not because I was perfect, but because I was his. A warmth spread through me, stronger than before. It wasn't just around me, it was inside me. I could feel it filling every part of me, healing places I hadn't even known were broken. And then, as I looked down, I saw his hands. There were marks on them, scars, but not like the scars from childhood scrapes or accidents. These were deeper, eternal. They weren't wounds of pain. They were wounds of love. I didn't have to ask what they were from. I already knew. The cross, the price he had paid. For me, for all of us. My breath caught in my throat. How could I stand before him, knowing everything he had endured? How could I look into his eyes and not weep for what he had suffered for me? But before the guilt could take root, before the weight of that realization could crush me, he spoke again, and his words washed over me like an ocean. It was always love, not duty, not obligation, not because I had earned it. Love. That was why he had done it. That was why he bore those scars. For love. For me. For everyone. And in that moment, I understood something I never had before. He would have done it even if it had only been for me. Even if I had been the only one. That was how much he loved me. That was how much he loved every single soul. The golden light around us seemed to pulse brighter and stronger. I didn't know how long I stood there. Seconds, minutes, hours? Time didn't exist here the way it did on Earth. But I knew one thing. I never wanted to leave. I wanted to stay here, in this perfect peace, in this presence that filled every part of me. I wanted to stay in this love, forever. And then, his expression changed. Still loving, still gentle, but there was something else now. A kind of sorrow, a kind of knowing. And before I could ask why, he spoke again. "Ethan, it is not yet your time." The words crashed over me like a tidal wave. Not my time? I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. "No," I whispered. "Please, I don't want to go back." He didn't answer, not with words. But I felt his answer. It wasn't a rejection. It wasn't abandonment. It was purpose. There was still something I had to do, something waiting for me. But what? I wanted to ask, but before the words could form, everything shifted. The warmth, the light, the presence, it all rushed away. And suddenly, I was falling. I didn't want to go back. Every fiber of my being resisted, clinging to the warmth, the love, the peace that surrounded me. But no matter how hard I tried to stay, something stronger than my own was pulling me away. I was falling, Not in the way you fall in a dream, not weightless, not drifting. This was different. It was as if something had wrapped around my soul and was yanking me downward, back toward the place I had left behind. The light faded. The music dimmed. The presence of Jesus, the most perfect, overwhelming love I'd ever known, began to slip away. And then in an instant, pain. I gasped for air. The first thing I felt was a crushing weight in my chest, like I had been underwater for too long and had finally broken the surface. My lungs burned, my body ached, and every inch of me felt like it had been shattered and hastily put back together. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. I could hear the beeping of machines, the distant murmur of voices, the sterile scent of antiseptic filling my nose. I was in a hospital. I was alive. I tried to move, but my limbs were heavy, weighed down by exhaustion. I felt a hand gripping mine, warm, trembling. I turned my head slightly and saw her. My mother. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen, her fingers tightening around mine, as if she was afraid to let go. "Ethan." Her voice was barely a whisper. Disbelieving, hopeful. I swallowed, my throat dry and raw, and forced out the only word I could manage. "Mom." A choked sob escaped her lips. She pressed my hand to her face, her shoulders shaking as more tears fell. My father was there too. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his face pale, his eyes dark with exhaustion. But when he saw my eyes open, when he knew I was really there, I saw something shift in him. Relief, gratitude, something else, something unspoken, as if deep down he understood that I had just been somewhere he couldn't follow. The doctors said it was a miracle. They didn't use that word exactly, but I could see it in their eyes. They had prepared my parents for the worst. The infection had spread too far. My organs were failing. I shouldn't have made it through the surgery. And yet, here I was, breathing, awake, alive. But I knew the truth. It wasn't just medicine that had saved me. It wasn't just luck. I had been sent back. I had seen something beyond this world, beyond anything I had ever been taught in church or read in books. And I had met him. The weight of it all pressed down on me as I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment over and over in my mind. The light, the music, my grandfather, Jesus, his eyes, his love, his words. "It is not yet your time." There was something I was meant to do. But what? What could I possibly do that would be important enough for him to send me back? I had no answers. Only the unshakable certainty that my life would never be the same again. I want to know something from you. Tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? And don't forget to leave your name too. In the next video, I'll send a special greeting to some of you. Imagine your name being mentioned in front of thousands of people. It's your moment to shine. Let's make this community even stronger. Leave a like, comment your name and city, and I'll see you in the next one. The days that follow were a blur of hospital routines. Doctors checking my vitals, nurses adjusting the machines, my parents hovering over me like I might disappear again at any moment. But I wasn't thinking about the IVs in my arm or the steady beeping of the heart monitor. I was thinking about him. I was thinking about the light, the music, the love that had wrapped around me like a second skin. And I was thinking about his words. "It is not yet your time." I had been sent back for a reason. I had no doubt about that. But what was it? What was I supposed to do? The weight of that question pressed on me, heavier than anything I had ever carried. My mother barely left my side. She held my hand when she thought I was sleeping, whispering prayers under her breath, the way she used when I was little and had a fever. I could see the exhaustion on her face, the worry still clinging to her even though I had made it through the worst. My father sat near the window, staring out at the sky. His Bible rested on his lap, but he hadn't turned a page in hours. And then, suddenly he spoke. "Ethan." His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension underneath. "When you were in surgery, something happened, didn't it?" I swallowed hard. I had known this conversation was coming. I just didn't know how to begin. I looked at my father, at the man who had spent his whole life preaching about faith, about heaven, about the unseen world beyond this one. But how could I explain to him that I had seen it? That it wasn't just an idea, not just a belief. It was real, and I had been there. At first, the words came out slowly, uncertainly. I told him about the feeling of leaving my body, about seeing him and Mom in the waiting room. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. You saw us? I nodded. I saw everything. I described the hospital room, the doctors, the way my father had been pacing, the way my mother had been crying into her hands. They stared at me, their expressions unreadable. Then I told them about what came next. The light, the sky that glowed without a sun, the music that wasn't just sound, but something alive. And then I told them about him, about Jesus, about his eyes, the color of the deepest ocean, filled with a love so vast it swallowed me whole, about his voice, the way he didn't just speak to me, he spoke inside me, and about the words he had said. It is not yet your time. Silence filled the hospital room. My father's hands were trembling. Tears streamed down my mother's face. And for the first time in my life, I saw my father cry. I didn't know what they were thinking. I didn't know if they believed me. But what I did know was this. I could never go back to the way things were before. I wasn't just Ethan Turner, an ordinary 14-year-old kid anymore. Something had changed. Something had been given to me. I just didn't know what it was yet. The day I left the hospital, the world felt different. The sky seemed brighter, the air clearer, the sounds of life around me sharper. Like I had stepped into a reality I had never fully noticed before. But it wasn't just the world that had changed. I had changed. Something inside me felt unfinished, like I had been sent back with a weight on my shoulders, but I still didn't know what it was. And I wasn't the only one who felt it. My father hadn't spoken much since that night in the hospital. He had listened to every word I said, tears in his eyes. But after that, he had gone silent. He had retreated into himself, thinking, processing, questioning, until one evening, when he finally broke his silence. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky burned orange and gold, the air thick with the scent of summer. "Ethan," he said quietly. I turned to him. He was staring ahead, his expression unreadable. I've preached about heaven my entire life, about faith, about trusting in things we can't see. His voice wavered slightly. But I've never actually talked to someone who's been there. He turned to face me then, his eyes filled with something deep and searching. What was it like? I swallowed. How could I explain something so vast, so beyond words? How could I make him understand that it wasn't just beautiful? It was home. I took a slow breath, searching for the right words. "It's perfect," I finally said, not just because of how it looks, but because of how it feels. There's no fear there, no pain, no doubt, just love, pure love. My father nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "And Jesus?" he asked. I shiver at the memory, at the way my soul had nearly collapsed under the weight of his love. "He knew everything about me," I whispered. "Every mistake, every doubt. And he still loved me more than I could ever explain." A deep breath left my father's chest, like he had been holding something inside for a long, long time. Then softly he said, "I believe you." It wasn't just my father. Word started to spread, first through our church, then through the entire town. People wanted to hear my story. At first, I didn't know what to say. I wasn't a preacher. I wasn't special. I was just a 14-year-old kid who had almost died. But then I remembered Jesus' words. "It is not yet your time." I had been sent back for a reason. And maybe, just maybe, this was it. So, for the first time, I stood in front of a room full of people. And I told them the truth. I told them about the hospital, about leaving my body, about the warmth, the light, the presence. I told them about the eyes of Jesus. And as I spoke, I saw it, the way their faces changed, the way some of them wiped away silent tears, the way hope flickered in their eyes, like they had been waiting their entire lives to hear this. And at that moment, I understood this was the reason I had been sent back, not to live life the way I had before, not to pretend like nothing had happened, but to tell the world what I had seen. Because heaven wasn't just real, it was waiting for all of us. Before you go, I want to ask you something. This community we're building, it's not just a channel. It's a place where we can share stories that change lives. And the truth is, we don't earn anything from this. We do it because we believe in it, because we want these messages to reach as many hearts as possible. So, if this story moved you, if it made you think, or if you just want to be part of something bigger, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It might seem small, but trust me, it helps more than you know. Join this community of faith, of hope, of people searching for something greater. Because together, we're spreading something that truly matters. I used to think that life was about staying in the lines, following the rules, doing what was expected, and hoping that, in the end, it all made sense. But after what I experienced, after what I saw, I knew that life was so much more. It wasn't about staying safe. It wasn't about pretending that heaven was just some distant idea, something to think about only when we were old and gray. Heaven was real, more real than anything I had ever known, and I had been sent back to tell people. At first, I didn't know if I could do it. I was just a kid. Who was going to listen to me? But something inside me burned, a fire that wouldn't go out. It was like Jesus had left a mark on my soul, and every time I tried to go back to normal, to just be a regular teenager again, I felt it pulling me back. So I started talking. I started telling people what I had seen. And the more I talked, the more people listened. Strangers, friends, even people who had never set foot in a church before. They wanted to know. They wanted to know if their loved ones were really safe. If there really was a place where there was no more suffering, no more fear, no more pain. If there really was a God who loved them. And I told them the truth. I told them what I knew. That heaven wasn't just some dream. That Jesus wasn't just some story. That we were never alone, not for a single second, not in life, not in death. That no matter how broken we felt, no matter how many mistakes we had made, His love had already covered it all. And I watched as hope came alive in their eyes, as something inside them shifted. Because deep down, we all long for that truth. We all long for home. I don't have all the answers. I don't know why some people get sent back and others don't. I don't know why I was chosen to see what I saw. But I do know this. I will spend the rest of my life sharing this message. Because it's not just my story. It's a story for all of us. A story about a love that never ends. A story about a home that is waiting for us all. A story about hope that never dies. And if you're reading this, if you've made it this far, maybe it's because you were meant to hear it too. This is just the beginning. There's something even more powerful waiting for you in the next video. Something that could change your life. Don't stop here. Click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now and continue this journey. I promise it will be revealing in your life. And before you go, let's keep spreading this message together. Leave a like and comment, amen, below if you want to keep receiving blessings. Let's fill this space with faith and light.